Fandom is an investment, and with that investment comes an emotional attachment to the decisions the creators make and the ones the characters make. Sometimes bad decision-making can create necessary drama. Rocket wouldn't be Rocket if his mischief didn't cause a little unnecessary drama for his teammates now and then. With 10 years of movies, shows, and tie-ins, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has had its share of moments that left fans infuriated. Here are some of those moments. Some comic book mythologies are so ingrained in the character that changing them would change the very nature of the character. Bruce Wayne's parents have to be gunned down in Crime Alley. Peter Parker's uncle has to die at the hands of someone he could have stopped. And Captain America has to become frozen during World War II after making a big sacrifice. It's just the kind of guy Steve Rogers is. The mechanics of Rogers' sacrifice have changed depending on the version, but the end result has to end in a capsicle in the Arctic. It's a Captain America-themed popsicle. A capsicle. In Captain America: The First Avenger, that sacrifice was the result of Cap trying to stop Red Skull from taking his Tesseract-derived weapons and bringing the war to the United States. After knocking his way through a sea of Hydra henchmen and the Tesseract, sending Red Skull off to his new job on Vormir to guard the Soul Stone, Cap decided he has to crash the plane in the water. Except, why? He couldn't just circle around until Stark came up with something or just point it down and jump? When we saw him next, he was jumping out of planes without a chute. Maybe he really was nervous about not being able to dance. No matter whose plan it was, the super band made up of the Guardians of the Galaxy and the Avengers did manage to provide a challenge for Thanos. Their coordinated attacks kept the Mad Titan off balance long enough so Mantis could put him to sleep, allowing Iron Man and Spider-Man a chance to pull the gauntlet off. Even the Hulk wasn't able to manage that. It makes sense though, since both teams are coming off big W's, and the Guardians just fought a Celestial and won. All in a day's work. But the Guardians can sometimes be their own worst enemies. That's usually down to the team's impulsiveness, so when Star-Lord puts the pieces together about where Gamora is, he comes apart. Of course, it's an emotional moment to find out that your bitter enemy, who also happens to be your girlfriend's dad, hey, Peter Parker can relate to that, can't you, Peter? Has ended the life of your girlfriend. Okay, well, that can be overwhelming, but all he had to do was hold it together for another 30 seconds. And he could have punched Thanos' silly purple chin all he wanted because the snap would have been prevented. You could have saved the universe 3 times, Peter. Imagine what you could charge then. With the Avengers broken up, the Hulk in exile, and Thor dealing with some serious family issues, Earth's mightiest heroes were never fully assembled to deal with the threat of Thanos and his army of devoted followers. Making a last stand in Wakanda while scientist Shuri tried to separate the Mind Stone from Vision, many of the separated heroes managed to stand against the Black Order and the Outriders. When Thor activated the Bifrost with his shiny new axe Stormbreaker, he was able to change the tide of the battle. It was one of the best entrances in the MCU. All lightning and spinning axe with Rocket and Teen Groot by Thor's side. It was great, and still gives us goosebumps almost a year later. Unfortunately, Vision had been compromised, and Thanos had gotten the Time Stone from Doctor Strange. The team was on it, making Thanos have to go through each one of them one after another as they made their final stand. Except none of them had that sweet Thanos killing axe. Unfortunately, Thor only showed up after Thanos had taken the Mind Stone, completing the gauntlet. Sure, he didn't have Cap's comlink, but no one thought to tell the God of Thunder where the action was? 2 minutes earlier, and it doesn't matter where he aims. Thanos is a goner. Some heroes have villains that are almost synonymous with that hero. It's hard to imagine Batman without the Joker, or Spider-Man without the Green Goblin. Okay, maybe after 2 Green Goblins, we can have a Spider-Man without a Green Goblin for a while. For Iron Man, while he often runs afoul of the evil science organization Advanced Idea Mechanics, or AIM, his marquee villain has always been the Mandarin. For Iron Man 3, the MCU finally was promised a showdown between old Shellhead and the ring-wearing supervillain. But there was a hitch. A really big, mountain-sized hitch. Iron Man 3 came pretty early in the MCU. While Thor and his magic-wielding brother had already been introduced by that time, the Iron Man movies weren't ready for a man with 10 power rings he adapted from the crashed spaceship of a race of alien dragons. The Mandarin has a lot of character. So what we got was just a big tease. Instead of the Mandarin, we got an actor named Trevor Slattery posing as the villain. Not only was it a waste of a good villain, but of great casting with Ben Kingsley. Sir Ben made a menacing Mandarin until he wasn't. Fortunately, after the one-shot All Hail the King, we still have hope that the real Mandarin is out there somewhere, shaking his head. There were a lot of barriers between Thanos and his completed Infinity Gauntlet. First, there was the whole henchman plan that didn't work out. It turns out that the kind of people that you can get to nefariously steal super powerful gems might have nefarious schemes of their own. Who knew? So then he had to do all the smashing and grabbing himself. There was still one barrier left though. He didn't know the location of the Soul Stone. He had sent his favorite daughter out to find it, but she decided that was information best kept to herself. With the fate of half the universe at stake, she was willing to sacrifice her own life to prevent Thanos from getting his hands on the Soul Stone, even making Peter Quill promise to kill her if Thanos got a hold of her. But when Thanos starts torturing her sister, it's all she can handle. Threatening one of the pair of contentious siblings is a good move for Thanos. It worked on the Asgardians and it worked on his own kids. With both sisters understanding the stakes, Gamora could have held out and given everyone enough time to gather an effective defense against the rampaging Thanos. But she didn't. Before Thanos started walking through all of his enemies and delivered the Avengers and everyone else in the MCU their biggest defeat yet, there was another bad guy out there with a W on the Avengers. That was a little-known former Sokovian EKO Scorpion agent named Helmut Zemo. Far from his sock cap and crown-wearing, sword-wielding Baron from the comics, he was a grieving father who sought to tear the Avengers apart from the inside out. Far from being an Asgardian god with 2 Infinity Stones and a space army or a self-replicating super android, Zemo knew that he couldn't take the Avengers head on. So he came up with a plan. A ridiculously complex plan. First, he had to establish that Cap's bestie Bucky Barnes had, in his role as the Winter Soldier, killed Tony's parents. This wasn't even his plan, it was just the amazing coincidence that made his plan possible. Also, fortunately for Zemo, the team was already divided over the Sokovian Accords. As clever as Zemo's plan seemed, it relied a whole lot on events outside of Zemo's control to lead where it did. Zemo ended up proving that it's sometimes better to be lucky than good. The complicated world of rights. When Marvel was holding a yard sale trying to sell the film rights to its popular characters to keep the lights on, it didn't seem that big a deal to sell the rights to the mutants to Fox. 8 years later, after all their marquee titles had been sold off, they started Marvel Studios and the MCU. But what about heroes that are mutants, but who join the Avengers? Turns out that these characters are in a gray area where they can be shared, but you still can't say the M word in MCU movies. Such is the case with Quicksilver, who showed up in both the MCU and the Fox X-Men movies. In one, he's a mutant and son of Magneto. But in the MCU, he's the result of an experiment conducted by Baron von Strucker. Unfortunately, Quicksilver's time in the MCU was cut short in a way that was wholly unsatisfying for a speedster. The one guy who was faster than a bullet took 4 of them. Then, as if to undermine the dramatic weight of what had happened, we got a restatement of the phrase that had been associated with him. Didn't see that coming. For a long-standing Avenger, it was a disappointing showing. While we're on the subject of Age of Ultron, remember we just talked about signature villains? Villains that are so pervasive that they help define the heroes and their particular struggle? For the team of Avengers, Ultron is that villain. Created by Hank Pym in the comics, for those of you who are wondering why Ultron's head looked a little bit like an ant's, Ultron was meant to be a secret weapon in the war against ne'er-do-wells. Both in the comics and in the MCU, he was supposed to be the endgame. However, like most ultimate weapons, it all went wrong. And Ultron turned out to be Tony Stark's biggest mistake. Ultron has a tendency to never really be defeated, only set back. His practice of storing a backup of himself somewhere in case of defeat means he's a villain that's hard to put down. While we got a hint at his uploading and upgrading ways, when it came down to a showdown with the Avengers, he was relatively easy to defeat, even going so far as to eliminating what makes him such a menace by removing all the copies. Ultron went from being a long-standing menace to a momentary distraction. The two major comic book shared universes have been defined by the director that they've put in charge of their big team-ups. For the MCU, it was Joss Whedon, who directed the Avengers and gave the Marvel Cinematic Universe its aesthetic and feel. Joss Whedon of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Firefly and other beloved properties summed up part of his writing philosophy with the quote, "Make it dark, make it grim, make it tough, but then for the love of God, tell a joke." That last part has managed to separate the MCU from the DCEU headed by Zack Snyder that has been criticized for its grim, dark feel early on. This philosophy has followed through in the MCU as they've gone for lighter and lighter takes and more serious material. The Thor movie that deals with the death of Thor's father and the destruction of his homeland was played mostly for laughs. While this has kept the movies from being oppressively dark, it has also meant that the movies laugh at their own pathos, and to a degree, mock their own audience by not allowing moments to sink without playing it for gags. There's a time and place for jokes, Marvel. Going back to character decisions that have left fans frustrated, and to Thor Ragnarok, it really was an unfortunate series of events for the Odin Sons. Despite an Infinity Saga where heroes were tripping over Infinity Stones left, right, and center, when Thor went out to find them, he came up empty-handed. Not only that, but he found out his dad had been displaced by his brother and was on Earth waiting to die. Even worse, once he died, that meant that their big sister would be free. He hoped to prepare his boys for that eventuality, but they were too busy bickering for him to get around to it. You'd seriously think it'd come up at one point though, right? She showed up immediately, got straight to breaking Thor's things. If there's one thing Loki knows well, it's when to retreat, and retreat he does. Unfortunately, it's through the Bifrost to Asgard, where Hela is at her most powerful. By opening the Bifrost, Loki gave her a free ride to Power Town. Population, Hela. Thor Ragnarok was a hard turn toward the absurd for the Thor franchise. It started off with Kenneth Branagh. That's right, the Shakespeare guy. For a character of mythology and nobility, it made sense. Thor: The Dark World tried to follow that tone with its own mixed success. But even if Thor was given a more somber setting, the Whedon principle was still in full effect. For God's sake, make a joke. For the first two entries in the Thor saga, those jokes came primarily in the form of Dr. Selvig and Jane Foster's hapless intern Darcy. Darcy isn't a scientist, so how she got that internship is a bit of a mystery, even if she was the only one to apply. Her role in the movies was to act as an everywoman to the scientists, secret agents, and gods that otherwise populated the Thor films. Unfortunately, with no other role than comic relief, her character became as easily forgettable as Thor and Foster's relationship. The MCU sorted out a comic relief character that still has a personal stake in the story with Luis from Ant-Man. Please have Luis recap the Infinity Saga before Endgame, Marvel. Remember how hyped up we were to see the ever-loving Hulk charging into battle surrounded by Wakandans and the Avengers in the Infinity War trailer? Also, remember how that didn't end up happening? Aside from making us scour every frame for any trailer to see if we can guess where Marvel might be deceiving us, it also kinda bummed us out. With Universal holding the rights to solo Hulk movies, we've had to wait for team-up movies to get our fill of the Incredible Hulk. In Avengers Infinity War, we got a little bit of Hulk right up front as the strongest Avenger got in a fist fight with the Mad Titan. After that didn't go so well, Bruce Banner was left holding the reins, warning people of the coming danger. The only problem was, no matter how serious he made that danger sound, the Hulk wanted no part of it. Banner spent the rest of the movie trying to get the Hulk to come out, and the Hulk refused, leaving us as frustrated as Banner was. For sports fans, one of their greatest pastimes is to argue amongst themselves over which legacy teams from certain eras would beat other legacy teams from different eras, or if one particular player from one decade could outplay one from a different one. Sometimes they'll get into who is the GOAT, or greatest of all time. Likewise, comic book fans like to argue over which character is more powerful than the other. In the mythology of Marvel Comics, power levels have been codified through various means depending on whose power is being measured. For mutants, the pinnacle is the Omega-level mutant, like Magneto and Jean Grey. Other characters tend to be classed by how much they can lift, or the amount of power they can channel. The MCU doesn't have those distinctions yet. As a result, relative power can be a sliding scale depending on what exactly the needs are for the narrative. This can be a little frustrating to the comic book fans, who are accustomed to tracking these kinds of things, especially when a character who previously punched out the Hulk has a moment trying to push over a super soldier. Remember the Warriors 3? They were Thor's best buddies, along with Lady Sif during the simpler time when Thor was just a snotty prince with a tendency to act rashly. Even when his own shenanigans, which they warned him were a bad idea, got him in trouble with his dad, they were loyal enough to their brash friend to come to Earth and snap him out of it, so that he could come back and take care of his more conniving brother. They were also on call when Malekith came back from the Dark World to find the Ether that Jane Foster accidentally stumbled upon to find the Dark Elves and help Jane Foster, even though they were clearly shipping Thor and Lady Sif. In the comics, the Warriors 3, a creation of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, are Thor's closest friends, which is why it was so disappointing for them to be defeated in a blink-and-you'll-miss-it moment in Ragnarok. It's not just that they were taken out in Ragnarok, but they barely even managed to put up a fight. 2 died as soon as Hela exited the Bifrost, and the 3rd died with his army. It was a bummer ending for such good friends. Boy, was it a long wait for the Avengers space-hopping member Captain Marvel to join the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Her arrival is a bit of a game-changer for the MCU as we move out of the Infinity Saga and onto what lies beyond. The powers that be at Marvel Studios have indicated that the next phase will contain more of a focus on the cosmic end of Marvel Comics, with the Eternals being one of the other new heroes on the horizon. So, having the hero that splits her time between Earth and all those planets that unfortunately don't have the Avengers is a bridge to the next phase in Marvel. While Marvel doesn't always have massively powered characters, they do have a few. In the MCU, there's the God of Thunder and the Hulk. One is curtailed by the rules of his power, and the other views his power as a curse. While Captain Marvel faced a relatable challenge of being told to hold oneself to another's standard, her refusal to restrain herself to live up to others' expectations lacked a little bit of a spectacular overcome that we like to see in our hero movies. Maybe we'll see more of her growth in the future. Those are some of the more frustrating moments in the MCU. What are some of yours? Do some of these not bother you? Let us know in the comments section below, and be sure to subscribe to CBR and ring that bell to stay up to date with all of our videos. As always, thanks for watching.